Not too bad for an antique computer system.
Dino Crisis has always been Capcom's sort of second-tier survival horror series. A lot of people, when it first came out, looked at it as kind of like Resident Evil with dinosaurs, which it basically was. So the third game now is out on the Xbox, and it has actually made a lot of changes to its gameplay and also to the setting, so people aren't really going to be comparing it to Resident Evil so much anymore. The new game actually takes place in space on a derelict starship that you've been sent to investigate because it disappeared 300 years before. And so once this colonial starship has reappeared mysteriously, you've been sent to go check it out and figure out why it disappeared and why it came back. And once you go on board, you find out that the place is basically overrun with these crazy space dinosaurs. They're not exactly dinosaurs. They've got all kinds of weird powers, like they can shoot electricity and stuff like that, but you'll kind of figure out why they are what they are as you play the game. Probably the feature that sets the game apart from survival horror games the most is the jetpack that your characters can use. The jetpack lets you jump really high, lets you glide over unsafe surfaces, stuff like that. You can hold down the jetpack button and sort of dart around real quickly, which is useful for getting away from fast enemies, that kind of thing. And since you can jump pretty high with the jetpack and glide around, there are actually a lot of platforming elements. There'll be like moving platforms you have to jump on and jump across chasms, stuff like that. Otherwise, the shooting action is pretty standard fare. You've got kind of a loose auto-targeting system that lets you target enemies and basically direct your fire at whatever the closest enemy is. You've also got a secondary attack item called the Wasp, and there are several kinds of those, and you can basically tap the button and send these little flying robots out that'll help you fight enemies. So the platforming and shooting stuff is pretty standard. It's about what you'd expect. You also rack up sort of a score as you kill enemies. The score is actually referred to as the number of credits, and the more enemies you kill, the more credits you get. And you can also collect basically little collectible items around the ship to increase your credits. And whenever you find a save point, you can go basically shopping. You can upgrade your character, you can buy new items, you can increase your carrying capacity, stuff like that. And there are also a lot of survival horror elements in the game. You know, you move around the ship looking for key cards to get into new areas. You find old files that you can read, like old memos and emails, stuff like that, from the previous occupants of the ship, and that, in typical survival horror fashion, that helps you sort of unravel the storyline as you play through the game. Graphically, Dino Crisis 3 is really a pretty good-looking game, even by Xbox standards. It runs at a pretty good frame rate. Everything looks real nice. The most striking thing about the graphics in the game are that the backgrounds are incredibly shiny. I mean, it's almost to the point of absurdity how shiny everything inside the ship is. It's like the artists figured out that they could make things shiny with environment mapping or whatever it is they use, and they just went absolutely nuts with it. It looks kind of cool at first when you're running around and everything is all reflective and shiny, but in the end it actually is kind of frustrating because it makes it harder for you to find your way around since everything kind of looks the same. So on paper, Dino Crisis 3 has all the markings of a good game. I mean, it's got pretty solid combat for the most part, although the auto-targeting can be a little frustrating at times. It's got all the survival horror elements that you probably would want out of a game like this, but unfortunately, when you get down to it, Dino Crisis 3 is defeated by its camera system. It's just incredibly frustrating to play because the camera is modeled after the old survival horror style where the perspective is sort of tethered to the background and where you're standing. So the camera angles will change as you're running along, often for the worse. You can't control the camera at all, which means that often enemies will be out of sight. You won't be able to keep up with what's going on. It's not uncommon for you to walk into a room and have the camera angle facing you with enemies just off screen about to charge you, and if you don't really know about them, there's not much you can do because they'll just pop out and hit you. Since this is a Capcom game and it has sort of survival horror heritage, you'll find the kind of B-movie writing and voice acting that you'd expect in say, Resident Evil. The CG cutscenes are actually pretty high quality, surprisingly. But other than that, you shouldn't expect anything akin to like a Hollywood movie. It has definitely got the survival horror B-movie feel. Other than the voice acting, the sound design is pretty solid. You know, you've got your standard array of dinosaurs roaring and stuff blowing up and guns, that kind of thing. There's not a whole lot of music. It's kind of sparsely done, but it's pretty good at establishing some tension. So in terms of overall presentation, the game does look and sound pretty good. When it comes down to it, Dino Crisis 3 is just a pretty disappointing game. It's not so much because there were a lot of high expectations for it, but just because it's pretty close to being a good game. It's just effectively broken by a couple of poor design decisions. If you want to play Dino Crisis 3 and have fun with it, there are two conditions that you need to meet. First, you need to want to shoot a whole lot of space dinosaurs, and second, you need to be able to deal with a really maddening and terrible camera system. So if you don't meet both of those criteria, then you should probably avoid this game.